Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Pure Experts Engagement Series 2021. We're broadcasting live today from Celebro Media Studios in London. I'm Charlotte Gentry, CEO and founder of the Pure Communications Group and chair of the Events Industry Association, EVCOM. Over the next 60 minutes or so, we are going to be discussing the very pertinent topic around how the customer buying experience has changed over the last 12 months and how we need to build a robust communication strategy to assist with enabling this moving forwards over the next 12 months or so. We've got 4 fabulous expert panelists who are going to be here to answer all of your questions, so please do submit as many questions as you can. We have written a white paper surrounding this topic, which will delve much deeper into these issues, and we will be sending that through so you can download that over the next 48 hours or so. So all that remains for me to say is to hand over to Martin Fullard, who I'm delighted to welcome, who is the editor of Conference News, our leading industry magazine. So Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and I am delighted to be here. And boy, do we have an interesting set of panellists and discussion lined up for you today. But of course, as is the way with these things, audience engagement is absolutely key. So there is a hashtag which we encourage you all to use on social media, which is hashtag Pure Engagement Series 21. Of course, we also want your questions, so do pop them in the Q&A box. You should be familiar with how that works by now, and Charlotte will be monitoring those questions as we go through the session, and we'll throw them to our panellists when an opportune moment arises. So before we get down to business, I'm going to just give you a quick update on where we are at the moment at the events industry at large. So obviously, as lockdown continues to endure, lots of questions are abound about when we might expect to return to live. So far, it seems like September is a reasonable, perhaps, target for larger events to come back, but there is an indication that mid or small size events will be able to return by the summer, as testified by the G7 summit, which is scheduled to run in June in Cornwall. So that certainly gives us an idea. The Business Visits and Events Partnership have also recently submitted to the Treasury a 9-point plan list of requests which they think will help the events industry survive, which include things like event insurance support, extended support measures such as the furlough and business rates, and of course a special event fund as well. So interesting times. Certainly the government is starting to pay attention. One Industry, One Voice, for example, has recently given evidence to 2 all-party parliamentary groups. So before we dive into the subject of today, I'd like to ask Charlotte to maybe explain a little bit more about the white paper that you've recently launched. What's in it? What can we expect to find?
Thank you, Martin. Yes, we're excited to have written this white paper because it is around a very, very important topic that I think a lot of people are finding very challenging at the moment. Obviously, we all want to see a rise in confidence in live events, and so there's a whole section around what we need in order to see that happen. Remaining agile as well, with a continually shifting communications mix and not just necessarily looking entirely at live events, but looking at those touch points. Building those and deepening those customer relationships is hugely important, and building authentic connections with your client base is very, very key. Experiential campaigns within a digital buyer arena now is very, very important. And something that's really interesting that's risen over the last 12 months has very much been the rise of the live streamed customer buying experience. So we'll be talking about that as well. So lots of interesting things to cover.
Yeah, really interested when you said authentic connections. I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? Authenticity. And speaking of connections, I think it's now time to introduce our panellists. So I think we can see them on the screen. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So Rob, would you mind telling our audience exactly who you are and where it is you work?
Good morning, Martin and Charlotte. Lovely to join you today. My name is Rob Sinclair-Barnes. I'm a global brand director and change management consultant, specialising in digital transformation, particularly in the technology, hospitality and travel and aviation industry.
Thank you, Rob. Richard, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Brooks. I work for a business called Stitched in the product licensing business under the Puma Group. We specialise, my particular area specialises in fanware, specifically motorsport. 95% of my time is on product and merchandise that we sell in three particular channels: in retail, distribution, and events.
That's great. Thank you very much, Richard. Next, Christiane, please tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, so my name's Christiane Peck. I've got 15 years experience working in events and experiential all over the world, mixture of supplier side, agency side, and most recently in-house. So I'm head of events at Clear Left at the moment, a very new role, but previous to here I was in-house at Shell, and then previous to that I was in-house at Virgin Atlantic.
Thank you, Christiane. And last but by no means least, Nikki, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Morning, everyone. I'm Nikki. I've been in the events industry for about 13 years now, working across the not-for-profit, investment banking and publishing sectors. And my current role is Head of Events at Hearst UK, and I head up our events division called Hearst Live. We publish 23 titles, including brands such as Elle, Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar and Good Housekeeping. And my role is our editorial teams and commercial teams to bring our brands to life in an event and experiential capacity.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Now, the first topic I want to really discuss with you guys really is about reinstilling confidence in the live events market. Obviously, there's a lot of anxieties out there, both at corporate and individual level, and there's lots here to discuss, no doubt. So, Richard, I thought I'd come to you first. Is there, in your experience or in your opinion, a level of confidence and appetite to actually return to live interaction in 2021, despite whatever the government plans might suggest to us?
I think in our sector, in sports, I think absolutely there is an appetite. Fans have been locked up for almost 12 months. They're eager to get back into stadiums to see their favourite team, to see their favourite performer, to see just have that atmosphere. You can't replace that from having simply surround sound and big TVs at home. You want that atmosphere. Now, I think that appetite is really strong in the fan base, but it's the local governments and restrictions that are going to be imposed on stadiums and venues that is going to determine that level of attendance, and that has a commercial impact throughout. So, generally speaking, I think the appetite is to fulfil an entire stadium. However, we can assume that restrictions are going to be in place, that something like Twickenham, who holds 88,000 people, is probably going to be restricted shorter, and can only hold probably half that amount. I'm only assuming that, but that's a safe bet, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Christiane, maybe I could get your opinion then. In your view, do you think that there is a genuine appetite for a return to live interaction in 2021?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, if anything, as time goes on, that appetite's increasing. Everyone's starved of human connection, and they're desperate to get out there to see their colleagues, to see their friends. They desperately want to get out and get back to live events. I think pivoting to virtual over 2020 has happened out of necessity, but people are really, really desperate to get back out to live events again.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to bring Richard back in, and Christiane, I want your view on this as well. I mean, in your opinion, what do businesses actually need to do to kind of make their customers or their clients feel safe physically?
Yeah, I mean, in our particular area, our involvement is on the physical sale of merchandise. So we operate the exclusive merchandise rights for Formula One. So imagine Silverstone, that's got 32 selling sites dotted around the track, and previously we simply that person-to-person transaction of picking a product up and then engaging with that customer and selling that product. Now, obviously, as a business, you've got to look at investing in the appropriate safety measures to make sure that social distancing aspect, that safety, health and safety piece is up to date with the new COVID regulations. Now, all that stuff is available. Self-ordering QR codes. Simple things like perspex screens, face masks for all your staff. we can bring that all in, but it's the commercial impact that it has. It's probably COVID has just fast forwarded all those pieces, particularly digital and self-ordering, going to an event, being able to sit in your grandstand seat and then looking at your mobile phone to be able to order a merchandise product and then on your way out pick it up. That takes a lot of investment, and the margins that are involved in merchandising at particular events are already very fine. But it's crucial that we create that safety net for the fans. But the key for us is how do we go further in converting that attendance base.
Yeah, it sounds like a logistical headache, to say the least. I'm glad I haven't got to do it. Christiane, then, I mean, what's your view on this? I mean, is the kind of government-attested guidance enough, or people want to see a little bit more than that from the organiser themselves?
They want to see more. I think as a corporate, you have a duty of care to make sure that you're considering all of the government regulations, but also doing everything you possibly can to make your attendees feel safe and looked after. That could be implementing health and safety procedures on site, whether that's rapid testing, hand sanitizer, whether it's the death of the buffet, which I think could be the future for catering in large scale events. But I do just think it's about that duty of care, making sure everyone feels like every box has been ticked and that they're going to be attending a safe and considered event, and also offering attendees the flexibility to not attend if they don't want to. If for any reason they personally have a commitment that they need to prioritise, then that flexibility is going to be needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Christiane, I'm going to stay with you on this next question. Have other comms vehicles kind of replaced face-to-face, or are we using the wrong vernacular? Do they sit more alongside?
I think virtual has been a necessity. We've had to move towards it to get what we can out of 2020. I think the key things for me out of my attendees when they come to corporate events are, that face-to-face, networking, education, and engagement. And there are some good alternatives, but I really don't think that you achieve the key objective in a virtual environment. I do think for the future, what could end up happening is more hybrid options. I think that provides attendees with accessibility where, they might not be able to attend an event, or they might not have the ability to attend an event, the money, or whatever reason. I think hybrid might be the future, but that in-person connection is still going to be the key to achieving a lot of our objectives.
Absolutely. Evolution tells us one thing: us humans are social creatures indeed. I want to move the conversation on now, and Rob, I'd like to bring you in. I want to kind of discuss this idea of, remaining agile in a continually shifting comms mix. If there's one thing the last, year has taught us, is that we're having to change and adapt and deal with short-term regulation changes all the time, and it's a bit of a headache, let's be honest. So, Rob, what tools and comms vehicles are brands and corporates now using to increase their customer engagement? Maybe you can give us a bit of insight.
Yeah, sure. I think overall it's fair to say that we are absolutely living in a digital first environment, and people have talked about mobile first. We're very much digital first, and what the recovery of the COVID situation has proven is that actually everyone needs to get under the understanding of knowing your audience, using data analytics and actually mining what are your audience doing, what are they looking for, how are you targeting the right people, and being much more precise. You cannot, as Christiane mentioned just there, everyone wants to get face-to-face engagement, but when you're virtual online and moving towards those areas, the recovery is much more about the smaller groupings. It's doing it in smaller stages, getting the right people together, and really harnessing the experience, that interaction and sharing of insights. So I would say right now, the biggest thing is to get those data analytics, have a centralized database of who you're targeting, what do they want to know, what do they want to understand, and how can you bring the right people together in the right environment.
Rob, actually, I wanted to ask you a question. which is that, currently, people are spending, from what I can understand, a lot of time looking at the platforms in terms of virtual events and focusing a lot of time and energy on this. And I wonder whether the platform that you're really looking at, it doesn't really make an enormous amount of difference, but actually it's the interaction and the engagement through that platform that's really the important part. So I just wonder what your thoughts are around that.
I think as long as it works, as long as it's reliable, as we all know, that classic sort of bingo, you're on mute and, we can't hear you. I think we've all recovered. And even today, this morning, in talking the green room, I was quite astonished to hear, some of the panelists businesses have only just moved to centralized cloud-based documents in the last year. From my experience, it's been part and parcel for the last 10 years of having centralized activity. So what I would say right now is that it's less about the platform, but making sure that the platform you're using works, it interacts with others, and it's very much more compatible. That's the real thing, and everyone has the ability to use it, and more importantly, everyone's trained on it. And that's one of the things I really think that we've discovered is there's not been enough support and across the board of learning how to use these digital tools in terms of then moving to the next stage and starting the recovery process.
I mean, Rob, that doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive pursuit, does it? People hear, cloud-based training staff, and then the pound signs start flickering in their eyes. I mean, surely that's just the evolution of any business.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't agree more. And what I think this whole environment has taught us is that you can no longer rely on the fact that you can quickly speak to the person on the desk next to you and ask them a question because you've forgotten about it. In this world that we've been living in, it's made everyone have to be their own individual experts. And from that perspective, I think it really falls on the support, the HR, the training and the development teams to make sure everyone's tooled up. Tooled up in the right way, they understand, and yes, it's fairly cost effective. It's not a difficult thing to do, and tips and tricks. I think we've all been in a situation where, as we go through the year and as we move forward, we learn and we share, and through those insights, we share what works and what doesn't work.
I've actually got some great comments that are coming through from the audience, which is great. Nikki says that there have been some great benefits to virtual events, and she raises a very good point, which is that content is key, and I think that's probably something we'll come on to shortly. And Adam has, first of all, asked us when we'll be sending through our white paper, and that will be within the next 48 hours, the ability to download it, so don't worry about that, Adam. But also, he's mentioned that the length of a virtual platform is key, so people don't get that screen fatigue. So yeah, and there's a bit of a debate going on about who likes buffets and who doesn't like buffets online. So yes, good point raised by you, Christian.
Yeah, if anyone's talking about awards events online, let me know, because I've got strong opinions on that. Rob, I wanted to come back to you. Just a quick word, really, on how frequently should a company be looking to update its external communications strategy. We've had a year where things have turned on a sixpence. People thought they might be going live this year, but now they're having to go online. It's a ever-evolving beast like never before.
It's an interesting one. I think we have to do it in phases. And if we look back at where we come from, and we're talking about the new norm, in all the cases, I think every industry you look at, whether B2C or B2B, had an annual rhythm. There was a big events in a certain part of the year, and then corporate events fitted in between that, and user forums, etc. And somehow, I'm not saying we could always break the chain and new entrants coming in. I think really we've now got a clean whiteboard effect. And I think, from my point of view, it's quality over it's really quality over quantity. And I would encourage every member to get together with their associations and their customers and say, what works for you? What's the right frequency? And how do we work together to reset the new norm that works for everyone in the right pattern? But certainly, I would say that every industry was over capacity on events. And as a global brand director and running a marketing team, we were actually the ones that were responsible and accountable for managing the C-level diaries. So our board level came to us to say which events should we attend, which are the right ones. It became almost a marketing nightmare to try and manage, especially in a global international business, who goes where. So I think it really is going to be the people that give value, hit the right spots and get the right people with the right shared insights, that's going to set the new trend for every industry going forward for the next, I would say, 5 to 10 years.
Interesting. Might come back to you on that in a moment, Rob, but Christiane, I'd like to bring you back in. For your opinion, please. I mean, what should the lead time now be for a strategy? Is it shorter now rather than being perhaps annual? You know, it's about this idea of turning on a sixpence once more.
I do think it should be a lot shorter, and I think any strategy now should be reviewed constantly. You know, if you're delivering virtual events, you should be looking at the engagement levels, the data, the analytics to see whether there's anything you would tweak for the next one, and reviewing how all of those pieces of the puzzle fit together and whether there's anything that you do need to tweak to improve the message that you're trying to convey to that audience, whether it's internal or external. I think they're both relevant audiences. But yes, I do think shorter, being more agile, reviewing frequently, and agility, definitely.
Excellent stuff. Rob, is that something you would agree with?
I probably have to disagree on that one. Being a strategist at heart, apologies, Christiane, for this. I think we're mixing up strategy with tactical. I think every successful business must have a clear defined strategy that fits the business strategy. And that's got to be at least 1 to 3 years going forward. Then what I think you've got to do is very clearly have your quarterly tactical windows. So you should review the progress, the success to that overall strategy. But I would really question, unless it really is quite let's say, a less established business, whether you're in a situation where you're reviewing your strategy on quite such a frequent basis. To me, a strategy should be about the purpose of the company, what you stand for, and how you wish to engage with your own team and your audience. And then absolutely quarterly reviews tactically to say, are we making progress? What's working? What do we need to hold on? How do we move forward? So I would say, I think, have to divide true strategy with business tactics in terms of how we work.
That's interesting. So I'm going to kind of move on to Rob. We're going to stay with you on this one because I think, you know, it's really interesting what you say. Building your customer relationship strategy with the need for speed culture. You know, it's an interesting subject as people, you know, come to adapt to this sort of new age. What are the key tools that companies are using to build and deepen relationships with their clients at the moment?
I think it's very, coming back to what I was saying before, data analytics, and this is an area I've worked in quite extensively over the last few years. I've been astonished at how many very successful businesses I've come into to consult, and they've had multiple central, what they feel is central customer databases. To the extent they might have 5 or 6 different repositories or areas all conflicting. And to my mind, as I think Charlotte was mentioning earlier, decide your platform. Be clear about what your customer database, your customer CRM strategy is and what tools you're using, and make sure everyone in the company is using the same tool. All the digital interfaces are feeding into that. It doesn't mean to say everything has to be centralized in one place. It just means to say that you've got a master record that feeds everything else and vice versa. And certainly, I think it definitely changes the habits of people to maintain that database. I mean, how many times are salespeople too busy, they're too much on the road, that they haven't updated their sales information enough? And how does the impact that has to marketing and what I call customer service? And really, we have to focus on, all companies have to focus on a central database of record that really is refreshed and updated on a weekly or monthly basis. Yeah, whether that's electronic with feeds from data sources such as things like LinkedIn or other devices, or your own intranet, extranet activity.
Thank you, Rob. Christiane, I kind of want to, by the way, I am aware that Nikki hasn't really spoken yet. We have got questions for everybody, don't worry. But Christiane, again, sort of same question to you, really. What tools are companies using to build and deepen their relationships? Do you agree with what Rob's just said? Do you have any different insight?
Yeah, I think so. I think the type of businesses that I work with, I've worked with different types of audiences, over different types of businesses. So internal and external, or obviously we use different tools to engage with them in different ways. I'd say for the audience at the moment, which is the design and digital community, they're heavily engaged in Slack. It's a great way of keeping people engaged, keeping people talking formally and informally. And I have to say, it's been one of the best pieces of software that I felt connected to my colleagues and to my community, that's easy to tap into and tap out of as and when I want to. And then kind of moving back, when I was in-house at Shell over the course of lockdown 2020, my audience there was the STEM community, and a lot of them are mostly engaged in social media. And we were running competitions over social media. So yes, it's important to maintain relationships with them over those channels. But yeah, social media and Slack.
So how, Christiane, I'm going to stay with you. How can we sort of energise these relationships and sort of stay ahead of our competition? I mean, how do you really create the buzz?
I think staying ahead of the curve, trying to keep them engaged with innovation and news of what's going on in their particular industry. In terms of virtual events that we're putting on to keep them engaged, I am constantly reviewing how we're delivering what we're delivering and seeing what we might need to tweak. I heard someone speaking earlier, sorry, I can't remember who it was, but about Zoom fatigue, and that is a genuine real thing. So now when I'm devising agendas, I'm trying to keep it short, sweet, engaging, and possibly over kind of different chunks of time over different days to make sure that people can tap in or tap out whenever they want. We also release content post-event for people to watch on demand. That's getting really, really good reviews with our audiences.
So, Christiane, again, I'm going to stay with you on this. I'm just curious, can we really deepen relationships with clients via digital channels? I mean, it's certainly okay as a kind of holding pattern as far as my experience tells me, but can we really embolden a relationship with a client over these channels?
Yes, I think it's hard. I think it's different depending on who your client is and what kind of demographic they are and what channels they engage with. I think generally it's difficult to build up relationships digitally. You know, as someone who's just started a brand new job a couple of weeks ago, trying to build relationships with my colleagues, with my customers, with my audiences, virtually is so much harder. Being in a room next to someone, being able to chat to them is so much easier. And you need that emotional intelligence to guess what someone's thinking and how they're responding to you. But it's a challenge. But I think over time, if anything, it's just pushing us more towards getting back to live as quickly as possible and to being sat in an office with your colleagues and developing relationships that way.
We've had some great comments actually from the audience, just talking about actually one of the major benefits of virtual events is that the international reach and the general reach overall of the content is far, far greater. So I think, in fact, I think it's Sam has very interestingly pointed out that they've increased their attendance by over 50% as a result of virtual. And that's within the sort of software centre arena. So quite interesting that actually, I think it's really worked for quite a lot of businesses moving to virtual as opposed to having to rely on getting that face-to-face contact.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, I'm just kind of keen for your view on this, really. Again, going back to this idea of, really deepening a relationship. I'm not talking about just keeping it steady. I'm talking about actually drilling down to what a client's needs are, furthering that relationship and making it valuable. Can digital technology really help achieve that?
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And we've been in environments where through interaction, certainly in the B2B software space, you can pretty much do everything digitally as opposed to physically. I'm not saying that physical is obsolete anymore, certainly not. And that's where you build. We all know that the majority of business is done in the face-to-face and the networking environment. But digital does certainly have a play. And I think I would like to come back on to point just made. I think there's a massive opportunity for businesses to grow internationally, where they previously couldn't because of reach in terms of physical. It's not expected right now. It comes down to this point I made earlier. It's the quality over quantity. And have you got every single part of your organization truly aligned in terms of understanding the purpose, the focus, the value of what you're trying to communicate and what you're trying to deliver? And we have gone from an environment where people have been used to getting up, or sales presenting, 30-minute, 20-minute presentations, to a static audience. That's now turned into 30-minute videos or quick adverts, or that activity. So I think it's fundamentally changed the way that we need to think about communicating. And certainly picking up on the Microsoft research a few years ago, where we all have attention spans of about 8 seconds. And I think now we're zoomed out, it's probably even less. So we just got to understand that piece in how we communicate, both regionally but also internationally.
I was going to just play a quick joke on you there and just say I wasn't paying attention because you spoke for longer than 8 seconds. I've proven that that's wrong. I was listening. That was really interesting. But Rob, you talk about authentic connections and building authentic connections with your customers. And I'm going to just kind of ask you quickly about influencer marketing. And we're not talking about, our dear friends who appear in the Daily Mail sidebar of shame, who are spending 2 or 3 weeks in Dubai at a time just for the purpose of free meals and Instagram likes. How effective is influencer marketing really? And can it actually be an authentic means with which to, kind of embolden connections with your customers?
Maybe I'll split that in 2 ways. If I speak perhaps on the B2B side,
yes,
which is more my experience, and then hand over to one of the other speakers on B2C, I would say B2B is less important. I think what you need to invest in B2B is shared insights. And the most successful activities I've done with companies in the past is where we've got user groups or influencers of customers together to influence other customers without actually us as a client being in the room. And really that whole testimonials, case studies, sharing of insights is absolutely critical, and you almost need to build up that user group to the point where in the past we've had clients go visit each other separately to have a discussion, and then separately inquire and actually come back to us to meet, outside of a core event. I think there's also the opportunity for hybrid activity where you've got clusters of influencers that can communicate, get together regionally. Locally in one country, and then influence to other groups in another country as well. So there's lots of opportunities, but B2B is very different to B2C world.
Which one of you then would have more experience with the B2C climate of influential marketing? Christiane, is that something you have got any experience with?
It is, but I feel like I've been asked so many questions.
I know you have, but there is method to that madness.
Okay, great. Well, yes, I have had quite a bit of experience in influencer marketing, and from what I have learned over the years is that it's so hard to find an authentic influencer that works right for your audience and works right for what objective you're trying to achieve. And there's been many campaigns I've worked on where I have considered pulling the plug because we haven't found the exact right person, which is so key and very difficult. But yes, it's important that they come across as authentic, they have access to the exact right audience you're trying to communicate with, and yeah, it's a hard process.
Absolutely. Nikki, are influence marketers something that you come across at Hearst? Are they something that you would use? Tell us about your experience with them. Do you think that they're an authentic way of engaging with your audience?
Yeah, definitely. We really do rely on influencers, but when we talk about influencers, we're also leveraging the internal talent that we have at Hearst. Obviously, we have a suite of trusted brands with editorial experts, so we can utilise our in-house fashion editors, for example, to add weight and kudos to the conversation in the same way that they do on a print magazine or in their digital content. So we've recently just done a fashion event with a commercial partner, and we were able to bring on board our fashion editor of Elle magazine, along with 2 other influencers, to pick out an edit of the new spring summer collection. And that was really, really powerful, because for the consumer, they like to hear the endorsement of products from a trusted and a known name. And then from the client, they obviously get to see that sales uplift. So it is really effective as long as you're using the right influencers and they've got credibility in whatever the topic is you're talking about from a B2C perspective.
No, absolutely. And Richard, I guess, in the world of motorsport, you're fishing in quite a small pool when it comes to the right faces. I mean, what constitutes a good influencer marketer in your world?
We're fortunate that we can rely on in Formula One, the drivers do all the heavy lifting themselves. Since F1 has transitioned with its new ownership with Liberty Media, we've seen the barriers with social media and content really come down. So what we're seeing is the drivers' personalities are really coming to life. They're not just simply answering the same questions every weekend. They're really showing people what they're interested in outside of the circuit. And that sort of personality is coming across in our product development. So last year we had great success, particularly with McLaren and Lando Norris. His personality through sim racing and engaging with his fans is coming across into products. And we develop a product range that suits that personality, and then we're reliant on his content then. But regarding any influencers outside of that, we honestly probably don't need it at the moment, because the drivers themselves are so engaging that it's really promoting our business, our product, and everything that surrounds that.
Would you say they're almost kind of influential marketers by accident almost? They're not actually setting out to do that. They're just part of the bigger picture and being almost used to fulfill that role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sim racing, particularly last year, everyone's gone into lockdown and are pretty bored at what to do at home. But gaming's obviously gone through a massive growth spurt, and part of that is sim racing. And part of sim racing, the drivers themselves use sims as part of their development, but we probably weren't really. I mean, the public probably weren't realise that. The true fans of F1 would, but the younger drivers in like Lando, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, using platforms like Twitch and things like that, have really engaged with a much wider audience than the traditional F1, and that influence is purely natural, and is fantastic. And that's probably credit to Liberty Media allowing them to do that. And we've seen all the teams are now engaging with esports and things like that. That growth, and that influence is just fantastic. So any influences external from that are involved in F1 are great, but the true organic influence coming from the drivers is the best it's ever been. And we're, as a business, in just simply selling merchandise, is benefiting from that.
Absolutely, and I'm a motorsport enthusiast myself, and I know full well that Formula One didn't even have its own Facebook page until a few years ago, until Liberty took over, which is just crazy when you think of the world that we're in. I wanted to kind of like just bring this, finish this circle off by coming back to Rob and bring it back to slightly more B2B context. I mean, has influencer digital marketing replaced event marketing in the traditional sense, or will a more traditional event marketing strategy remain important when it comes to getting our events out there?
I think it's a mix, and coming back to what we were talking about earlier, it depends on the strategy. I think businesses have had to rethink themselves. Are the events about targeting new prospects and new customers, or potentially are those events about continuing to build with existing customer bases and potentially growing complementary products, services, or activities or experiences? And I think everything has to sit comfortably. And when you come back to it, I think you've got to just set your stall and say, what results are we looking for? What's the measure by which we're going to test and judge the value of each channel, whether it's influencer marketing or event marketing or classic standard marketing or activities and sales, and then just make sure that each one is getting the right return on investment. And at all stages, you're constantly testing and judging, is it the right thing for the customer? And the worst thing you can have in any marketing is customer silence, or customers just purely leave because they're being overly bombarded with communication. And what I would say right now is, quality over quantity again. Just unless you're getting a response, stop just continuing to bombard prospects or customers in this world at the moment. Really think about what you're doing and make sure there's always that 360 feedback loop on any marketing channel that you're using.
Charlotte, that sounds really interesting. Is that something that you as an agency owner can agree with?
Yes, I mean, there is a huge wealth of content out there at the moment, and I think being very focused on how you direct that content is absolutely key. We certainly have a lot of people asking us, what kinds of creative events can they be producing online? And my response is always to say, take a step back from that, and actually, rather than thinking about just delivering your live event online, actually look at what the objective is, what the strategy is, and actually what you want the outcome to be. And there are now so many different touch points, which is why it's important to look at it as a much wider communications tool, with live events being one of the vehicles and not the only one. And it may be that your activity culminates in a virtual experience of some description, but that it doesn't have to be the only route. And in actual fact, that feeds in. We've got some more questions and some more comments that are coming through from the audience. And perhaps I can direct this one to Nikki from Thomas. Does anybody have any top tips for hosting creative sessions virtually? I'm sure you've done some creative things for your subscribers and your readers. And how do you make those more engaging rather than it just being another cocktail masterclass or another wine tasting? I think now we've probably come through the other side of activities of that nature. I think our audiences need to be more challenged than that, I think, perhaps to also want to attend, because everybody's got different time frames in their personal lives, and the work and home environment is now one and the same. So we all have to be mindful of whether people have got kids and, whether we're just adding that extra layer. So I don't know whether, Nikki, what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the key things for us has been around interactivity. We found the more interactive we can make the digital experience, the better. We're obviously trying to bring as much of the physical experience into someone's homes. So we've done that in a variety of ways. And actually, you touched on things like wine tasting and cocktail masterclasses. Those are the types of events where we see lots of engagement. We've been doing things like skincare masterclasses. And what we've been doing is sending products to the consumer's home before the event, and then they're following along live with a skincare masterclass, for example, and then they've got the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists live there and then. What that allows us to do is to really make it a more engaging experience, and those who are watching feel as close to the physical event as they possibly could. They're not just watching someone talking at them. And then the other thing we found is actually creating community, so actually enabling our consumers themselves to interact. We've done a big program called Bazaar at Work Week in November last year, and we targeted high net worth, career-driven women, and networking is a really key part of that event when we normally hold it physically. So we enabled all of our audiences to be able to chat, to interact with our panelists, to ask questions, and we saw a huge level of engagement. It's really, really key with digital events that you keep your consumers engaged, because ultimately you can dial off a Zoom call very, very easily. You can't really walk out of a physical event as easily. So we've found that we're really careful with what our content looks like, making sure that content is king, keeping it to the right level, which we're trying to stick to 40 minutes maximum, and really having that level of interactivity. And so far, it's been really effective.
That's really interesting. Can I ask, you may not know the answer to this, so we can call it a putting you on the spot moment. But is there any obvious pattern in the age demographics about who's actually signing up to these sort of online experiences? Is it generally younger people?
It really depends for us based on our brands, because we can have everything from Cosmopolitan, which is more targeting millennials, up to Bazaar or Good Housekeeping, which is the kind of slightly older end of the spectrum. So it really depends. What we found for an event we did last week on Elle magazine is the kind of 35 to 40-year-olds were engaging. On Cosmopolitan, we were getting much more of the 20 to 30-year-olds, and on Bazaar at Work Week, it was probably the 30 to 45-year-olds. So it really does vary, but you probably heard within that, it's kind of the 20 to 45 is our main, I think we're targeting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And I think, we've got to sometimes get our heads away from this idea that everybody of all ages wants everything in the same way. There's just so many different channels now. People like to consume their information in different ways. It's like journalism, isn't it? For 200 years, the only way you could really learn of what's happening in the world was through printed newspapers. Now you can do that. Certainly there's a proportion of the society that does like that. But then you've got to cater for your online needs as well, through video, through podcasts, through social media. It's just, well, it's a smorgasbord, and I don't envy any of you.
There's one challenge I think that a lot of businesses are having about how to create that networking experience online, and I think that's one of the really fundamental things that everybody's really trying to crack. It's slightly like the Holy Grail now, isn't it, really? How do you replicate, that feeling of walking into a room and being able to see some of your, industry counterparts, etc. Now we're having to try to do that online. Nikki, do you have any ideas around that from a networking perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I'll be really honest, I don't think you can create it in the same way digitally. You cannot beat, and I know Christiane said this herself, you can't beat the magic of in-person live experience, and that's what we all go to events for. However, you can still utilise some of the platforms and tools that are available to do a decent job of it. I've seen a lot more of it in the B2B sector, and I think there's a lot more experience of that where you can create kind of networking tools and platforms on the websites. From a B2C perspective, it's really for us been around creating the community of those watching the event. We've set up a lot of our events on custom microsites so that we've got a dedicated place where a set audience is going to, and that means you're likely to interact with like-minded individuals. You can follow along with the conversation. As I said, we've had the live chat and the interactivity, so that's proved quite powerful. And the other thing we've done is used other platforms. So for example, for our Bazaar at Work Week event on Harper's Bazaar, we created a custom LinkedIn group, and we directed all of the attendees to join that LinkedIn group and continue the conversation. So that's allowed us to really take that on for a longer term, but it isn't quite the same as physical, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it feeds in quite interestingly to the fact that a lot of this work now is more broad-based campaign work. And when you're talking about the likes of microsites and that level of engagement, that's certainly what we're spending a lot more time working on, and actually building those tools that create the messaging to last for longer, and people can engage with different types of tools, not just that they've got to log into another online experience.
Well, absolutely, and I think, Nikki, that was the question I was going to ask you. It's your turn to have the barrage of questions thrown at you. Excuse me. I mean, how have you built your experiential campaigns digitally? I mean, how can we move forwards, from online fatigue? I mean, you've seen great take up this year. That's great, but can that endure, or do we risk falling off the Zoom gloom plateau later on down the line?
I mean, I guess at Hearst we're very lucky. We're in a privileged position that we're already a 360 platform. So we have our print, our digital, and our events offering. So we were in lots of ways, we were well primed to be able to think about how we add events into that mix. But obviously, it's blurred the lines for us from a virtual and digital event perspective versus the previous physical interactions. I think what we've really kind of focused on is creating premium content that is evergreen. And that's perhaps something we weren't really able to do as much before. Previously, our events happened, amazing content, talent, etc. But that was kind of it. Unless you were in that room, you didn't get to experience it. What we've been able to do with virtual events is we've created content that is evergreen, and that content lives on our brand channels, whether that's through Instagram and social channels, or whether it's on our websites, or whether it's covered in the magazines. So it's given all of our content a lot more longevity. It's also enabled us from a commercial client perspective to create integrated campaigns where a client can get mass reach through something like a digital article or print magazine, and then deep level of engagement with our consumers. So it's actually really allowed us to kind of rethink our mix of things. In terms of going forward, I think hybrid really will be the key for us, but we have to do that carefully, because you can't just live stream out a physical event, because you're going to have a very weird dynamic of someone live in the room talking to an audience and then trying to stream that out live. So again, we'll be looking at how we can create content from our events that then lives on our digital platforms, and I think that will be kind of the focus for us in terms of how we deliver hybrid events going forward. It does give us a huge opportunity to target regional, international audiences that we didn't have before, and the same from a talent perspective. And I think that's one of the key things for us moving forward here, is it will be a lot more expected for a consumer to have someone zooming in or being shown on a digital screen, which just wouldn't have been the norm previously. And that will allow us to open up to global talent in a way like never before, which is really exciting. It's kind of press fast forward for us on the industry to create the best possible experience for everyone.
I've actually got a question here from Christopher, which is directly to Nikki, in actual fact, just sort of moving on a little bit from this. What do you think about collaborating, especially with third-party luxury networking groups? Do you think that's something that's viable and worth looking at?
Absolutely. We certainly do that within Hearst. We work with external partners to identify potential audiences who might be suited to our events. All of our events are ticketed, some fee paying, some not. And obviously, one of the key things for our commercial partners, often when they're coming to us to work with us, is they want to access a curated audience. And that's very much what we're the experts in doing. We have that through all of our magazines. So when it's the right proposition, yes, we would work with external partners, but equally, one of the big reasons you come to Hearst and our brands like Elle, Harper's Bazaar, Esquire, is that we already have those captive audiences, and that's what we're giving our clients access to.
That's really interesting. And you mentioned live streaming there and the customer buying experience, and that's going to make me turn to Richard. I've got a question for you. You know, motorsport, obviously, in large Formula One appears on TV if you're rich enough to be able to afford Sky these days. But are stream product launches and other such, engagements an effective method? I mean, can they really replace the live-to-live, face-to-face experience?
I don't think you can fully replace it. I think what the common theme throughout this discussion is everyone wants to work towards a more hybrid solution. So I think face-to-face has its purpose, but for certainly 2020, we had to go completely the other way and go full digital. So which we kind of have planned anyway in 2-3 years' time. COVID's just fast forward everything. But we sort of invested in a platform called Paperflight, which is specialised for sales and marketing, and it just allows a central place for content. And we sort of use that with our customer base. We use it to customize for each one of our customers. And what we saw was probably the best year ever from a forward ordering perspective. So from August to September, we do a forward order for all the Formula One merchandise that we're involved with, and that's to plan for the season ahead. So August, September last year was the plan for the merchandise launches for this year. And what we found with our customer base using Paperflight, that they were totally more engaged, purely because we just managed to condense everything into one central point. Like Rob touched on before, getting bombarded with information at different points. And that's how we worked before. We were having different sales windows at different times, but this promoted us to put all our content in one place. But also we had to do the homework as well, like work with our customer base in terms of ordering and strategy, financing, everything like that. We had to put all those tools in place into one place, and that's what really, really helped. Now, going the other way is, and Nikki probably touched on this as well, having to sell product digitally is difficult, because you need to touch, feel product, talking about new fabrics or unique selling points of product without actually seeing the product. It's impossible to replace. Fortunately for us, not a lot changes year on year. Designs and things like that do change, but hardcore product doesn't so much. Now, going to a more hybrid version, does that sort of promote the idea of sending samples to the customer? That won't work for us because every asset that we work with has about 200 different products. So unless you're selling pallets of product and they're just samples to the customer, just to be able to talk, I don't think that's the way forward. But this digital piece in terms of content, customized specifically for the customer, that's here to stay. But I do believe that when we have the ability to have live events, I think what we'll have is more of a launch event. So we invite our customers to see almost like a catwalk of products, and then it's a follow-up with this digital piece, which allows them, without too much pressure, to do the appropriate ordering and things like that. We also lose that.
I was going to ask Richard then, I mean, how have buying patterns changed in 2020? I mean, was it just expediting the inevitable with the changes you've seen over the last 12 months going to happen anyway?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 was a real pain. I mean, in terms of ordering patterns, they were sort of all over the place. We are a forward ordering business, so we put the responsibility on our partners, and for that you obviously get the benefit of terms and things like that. But what happened was that when racing stopped, so did our orders, and they were sort of forward orders. So we couldn't send them to like a distributor or retailer because they had no customers really. Everything had shut down. However, what we did suddenly see is when racing started to happen, albeit behind closed doors, those customers started to come back, and we just simply shipped their previous orders. Although everything was sort of probably delayed and chopped and changed, we sort of recovered in those sort of channels of retail and distribution, and that's probably thankful for all towards e-com.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. OK, guys, I'm going to have to bring the debate to a conclusion. Charlotte, some really interesting points that came up there.
Yes, I know, and we could probably sit and talk about this all morning, and we are nearly at the end of the morning. So I just thought it might be quite interesting, actually, just to recap on some key fundamental points that were raised over the last hour. There is obviously confidence in bringing back live events, but investment in safety procedures is absolutely pivotal with this. We need to remain agile in our communication strategy by knowing our audience, choosing quality over quantity of the experiences that we deliver, prioritising, engaging and aligning and doing a quarterly check on our strategies. And then how are we building those strong customer relationships? We need a strong CRM tool, and ideally only using one knowledge source is the ideal. Having data bash mornings perhaps is a good idea, and TED Talks. And investing in media, video and presentation training is crucial, because presenting on stage in a live environment is very, very different to presenting virtually, and we should all know. And building authentic customer connections through influencer marketing is a good thing to do, but probably in the mass arena. And it's difficult to replace event marketing, as it's essential in order to deepen those client relationships. Make online events interactive, send out gifts, have Q&A, chats online and online spaces to explore, creating content which is evergreen, tailor the online experience to the individual. And obviously there's much more that we've discussed today, but we'll be sending out a link to download our white paper within the next 48 hours or so. There will be a recorded version of this broadcast today as well, which everybody who tuned in today will have access to. And I know we probably haven't answered all the comments and all the questions that have come in today, but by all means, please do email me at charlotte@purecomsgroup.com. I'd be delighted to answer any questions. And your feedback is really, really fundamental to us, because we want to make sure that actually these broadcasts and this content is a valuable use of your time and that you feel it's really, really effective. So please do email me to let me know what your feedback is about today. And really all that remains to be said is thank you very, very much to the panellists for giving up your time today to talk to us and share your invaluable insights. Rob, Rich, Nikki and Christiane, thank you so much. And Martin as well, thank you for chairing the session so fabulously today as well. That was great. We will be doing more broadcasts of this nature, so we will keep you informed. And thank you all very, very much for tuning in today. It's been great to have you all on board.
And thank you very much, Charlotte. And at the end of the day, I think one of the key takeaways of today is that it's all down to what is the business objective and establishing authentic communication and connection between your clients, because that is, at the end of the day, what we do. We bring people together. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our panellists. Thank you to Charlotte. Goodbye.